I was invited to the Shenandoah Valley for a minority college visit back in the 80s with around 30 other African American students. One of the things I most recall was that there was a lot of excitement around that time about something called March Madness. And it was playing on the television set practically everywhere for that entire weekend. At that time, Washington and Lee University in Lexington, Virginia, unlike VMI next door, for the most part did not have any Division I teams or sports except for men's water polo and lacrosse. And of the 22 African American students that eventually matriculated in the fall after Ralph Northam had graduated that year and moved on from Rockbridge County, not even one was brought to that college on an athletic scholarship, painting a very different picture from the students of color who were accepted at his state college, where there were many outstanding athletes in football, track, and basketball who were African American. But I do recall from that college recruitment weekend that just about everyone was excited about the Division I college basketball championship that had, according to reports, ended with the number 6 seeded Wolfpack, led by Coach Jim Valvano at North Carolina State, winning its Cinderella title thanks to a 54-52 upset win against number 1 seeded Houston, as Lorenzo Charles missed a desperation shot but slammed a buzzer-beating dunk for the finale. What an ending. But despite growing up in what is often called an inner city, I wasn't on the basketball team in high school or even played in intramurals. And so when in June 1986, the news first appeared about a 22-year-old being discovered dead in Washington Hall dormitory suite on the College Park campus for the University of Maryland, I only learned for the first time that the 6'8" tall All-American forward and Prince George's County native had less than 48 hours before been selected by the Boston Celtics in the second pick in the 1986 draft. Was a young black man in otherwise excellent health and physical condition, who, with no evidence of other alcohol or drug consumption, had succumbed to cocaine intoxication after cocaine had interrupted the normal electrical control of his heartbeat, resulting in the sudden onset of seizures and cardiac arrest, according to medical reports. Hello, my name is Major Mike Webb, and I can assure you that if you are looking for a great basketball player for your team, in that regard, I can definitely say that I ain't really black, and would probably be the last person you would ever pick if you wanted to have a winning basketball team. You'd have better luck choosing one of the cheerleaders. But the Len Bias story, a young African-American male with his dream of joining the NBA just beginning to materialize, provides a great segue for discussing some basketball terms like stats on a topic that has adversely impacted his demographic of African Americans during a public health crisis, both in terms of health and educational opportunities, and that now has many parents, especially of color, considering the options of vaccination for their children. So for the next few moments, let's just talk about the stats for you to consider before you decide to set an appointment for your child to receive a free vaccination before heading off to join the over 29,000 kids in the Arlington Public Schools in the fall, about 53% of whom are kids of color, 26% Latino, 9.7% African American, 9% Asian, 6% mixed, most of whom are adversely impacted by an achievement gap in education, as measured by both standardized tests and academic grade point averages. Or you can be a real hero. Slam dunk this vaccine for your kid. Even the creator of the mRNA vaccine now has said, as of today, according to the Daily Mail, that he does not recommend this vaccine for your child. Today, over 144,000, almost biblically, of the 230,000 residents in Arlington ranked 14th in holders of graduate degrees and number one for the most government scientists in the nation, have volunteered to receive at least the first dose of the COVID-19 vaccine, offered for free by the government. And some quick math should tell you that it is definitely over half of the residents in this locality. And back in April, Superintendent Francisco Duran joined Monique O'Grady, school board member, and Roger Coleman, the principal of Washington, now Liberty High School, all persons of color, to stage a 3-day event to provide free vaccinations to at least 1,000 teachers, administrators, and staff so that they could return to school safely in the fall. Superintendent Duran emphasized the importance of showing the parents and others that he was setting an example by volunteering to take the vaccine himself, to demonstrate that the vaccines were safe, and offering encouragement for others to follow him and take that drug. And the early stories about Len Bias had presented a narrative about a straight-laced kid who decided to celebrate his newfound success by experimenting with a popular street drug, encouraged by his friends who had probably told him that nothing had happened to them after using cocaine. A story that survived for maybe about a year, but very different from the truth, as revealed later in trials in which Bias's friends and roommates told a more troubling story about a young basketball player who had frequently used cocaine and had even somehow acquired the cocaine conveniently that eventually killed him, and how all were surprised when their friend quickly devolved from a normal state of high and wobbling to going into seizures on the floor before his death. What were the chances of that, they probably wondered. Generally, when adult leaders plan to address situations associated with risks, unlike children, they will perform a disciplined and methodical inquiry to assess the levels of risk associated with the activity and attempt to balance that against the possible benefits, generally deciding to forego opportunities when risks are simply unacceptable. And before canceling worship services indefinitely on March 11, 2020, the Arlington Archdiocese had decided to use the science, consulting first with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and canceling in-person worship for over 444,000 parishioners in 70 parishes and in 6-month missions indefinitely. This was the same level of care that was exercised by the choir master in Skagit County, a county in Washington where there were no cases of infection, but who decided to use the science and engage in social distancing and preventing or trying to prevent persons who even felt sick from attending a choir rehearsal, but that found 60 members of their choir infected after a choir rehearsal and 2 dead at a time when there were no other cases of infection in Skagit County. But when the Arlington Archdiocese made its decision, that was 4 days before, on March 15, 2020, when Virginia Governor Ralph Northam had prohibited all non-essential social gatherings of 100 persons or more, at a time characterized by the Virginia Department of Health as being at low risk, finding only one fatality to a novel coronavirus in the entire state among only 45 laboratory-confirmed cases from just over 3,000 in the entire country, and with not even one outbreak from over 75,000 laboratory-confirmed cases in China associated with any large social gatherings. But today, the CDC, after a new holiday weekend break, has convened an emergency meeting to address a rash of cases of myocarditis, or heart inflammation, affecting children and young adults, mostly younger men, like Len Bias, who have volunteered with encouragement from family and friends and even government and social media and other sources, to be administered a free vaccine that has been offered as a reason to celebrate a victory over a novel coronavirus before the July 4th celebrations. And responsible parents, like even commanders and leaders in the military, have a duty to perform an assessment to balance the benefits and risks associated with that convenient choice. So let's do like we do during March Madness brackets and look at the stats to see how they line up. Today, over 5,000 persons, 100 in Virginia, 100 times more than had died in Virginia, and more than 2 times more than were infected when the state began to lock down, have died after receiving the new vaccine. A metric that is not often reported in the news, and a metric that has actually doubled in just the past month. But perhaps you are thinking that over half of the residents in Arlington have volunteered to take the vaccines that you know, and there was no problem for them. And maybe you yourself decided to administer the vaccine and nothing happened to you. But before you go to vaccinate your kid and give him that shot, think about Len Bias. The CDC meeting on the cases of myocarditis had been scheduled to commence last week, but was postponed because of the announcement about a new holiday to celebrate the abolition of slavery. And on the wrong day that slavery was actually abolished. And apparently that celebration was more important to the CDC because they chose to delay the first meeting for that emergency committee until June 23rd. But were you aware that the CDC had known about a possible risk of heart inflammation associated with the vaccine, according to their cached pages on their website, as early as February 11, 2020, even before the first orders to lock down the state had begun and before schools had been closed? Does that alter your perception of risk when the CDC decides to engage in ignoring a risk that was known over a year ago and delay after a holiday weekend to convene on that for something known over a year ago? You're at the foul line. Can you make that shot? Do you want to make that shot? When epidemiologists examine the clinical features of a pathogen that is emerging, one primary metric that they examine is what is described as the case fatality rate, which assigns a percentage value to assess the level of mortality risk or chances of dying from a disease once you are infected, which quite simply is the percentage of persons who have been fatalities divided by the number of persons who have been infected. And for COVID-19, despite the fear-inspiring death totals accounting for over 11,000 in the Commonwealth and in the nation exceeding 600,000, more than 100,000 above the annual death toll associated annually with the flu worldwide, that level of risk is actually just 1.8%, a less than 2% chance of dying after being infected with COVID-19. But did you know that in October of last year, the CDC admitted that only about 6% of the listed fatalities for COVID-19 that we see in the news and the press succumb to infection exclusively attributed to a novel coronavirus, but rather died of co-infections and other complications. That reduces the death total for COVID-19 to just 36,000 nationwide who died solely because of COVID-19, 17 times lower than the figures reported daily in the press. Do you still want your child to take that shot? When 1,800 teams of at least 5 epidemiologists examined almost 56,000 of 75,000 laboratory-confirmed cases in China that had been reported before February 20th, 2020, they found that among tracer contacts, there was only a secondary attack rate of less than 5% and only 0.9% in some areas outside of Ground Zero in Wuhan. And even China, at that time, was reopening businesses and schools after a determination that COVID-19 was not an infectious disease. Secondary attack rate is the measure of risk used by epidemiologists to determine the probability that an infected person will transmit the disease to another person in close social contact. and a less than 5% infectiousness is at least 4 times lower than your normal flu, 12 times lower than smallpox, which is considered a highly contagious disease, capable of setting off a super spreader event, which we have known since the 1980s as the baseline measure. But perhaps you have doubts about the credibility of scientists in China, or even the World Health Organization that had sent a special joint mission to China to learn more about the emerging pathogen in February 2020. Well, currently, according to reports, the Delta strain that had emerged in India is the predominant strain among new cases in the United States. And the Delta strain has been determined to be as much as 50% more infectious, which would make it 7.5% infectious. But in October 2020, around the time that the governor and later the president had been infected, scientists in India set upon the task of conducting the largest sample size tracer contact study that has been performed to date. Tracer contact that even the CDC admitted was the turnaround for the Ebola health crisis in West Africa. And that study examined over 3 million laboratory-confirmed cases and their close tracer contacts. But they discovered that the secondary attack rate was only 4.6%, confirming the findings by epidemiologists in China back in February 2020. Less than 5%, with a less than 2% chance of becoming a fatality if infected, and less than 5% chance of being infected even if over 50% of residents in Arlington, who may include your friends and family and yourself, decided to volunteer for a free, convenient vaccine that has been associated with over 5,000 deaths nationwide and 100 deaths in Virginia. Considering the risk of heart inflammation for kids and young adults, especially for young males, does it make sense for you to require your child to line up for that shot? Less than 5%. In February of this year, examining over 150,000 cases in 2 cities, Johns Hopkins University medical professionals in Baltimore examined the chances of reinfection after a person had been confirmed with COVID-19. And they found that the chance of reinfection within just 10 months was just 4.9%. And they described that risk assessment as one that was low. So to prevent a less than 5% chance of infection, is it worth the risk to your child to take a chance that more likely than not as an adult you have made for yourself? Over 80% of the 75,000 cases in China before February 20th, 2020 found nothing worse in symptoms than mild pneumonia, which even the principal of Washington Liberty High School says that he had himself. But over 100 persons in Virginia, more than 2 times than were infected at the beginning of the lockdown, have died because they chose to follow their friends and family advice who decided to be administered the virus, which CDC has known since February 2020 presents a risk of myocarditis or heart inflammation to your child. And only now they are convening an emergency meeting that they delayed to have and convene until after a holiday. Or you can be a real hero. Slam dunk this vaccine for your kid. Even the creator of the mRNA vaccine now has said, as of today, according to the Daily Mail, that he does not recommend this vaccine for your child. This briefing is unclassified, as you were. My name is Major Mike Webb, and by God, I am running for Arlington Public School Board. Let's keep Mike Webb away from our schools. Honest. Carry on. This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb.